Hello, everyone. I am glad to be here with you tonight for our Humanity and Medicine office hours. I think people are still joining. So if you're joining us here live or me here live, thank you for being here. And I'm very glad to be with you for this conversation. As always, it's useful to have something to write with. So if you have a journal, I prefer pen and paper or maybe something just open somewhere for you. I should um, be able to um, have some time and space to um, offer moments of reflection. But I'm really glad to be here with you tonight. And one of the things that I've been doing over the past week is collecting some of the stories that I'm so grateful to receive back from students at various seasons of their training who are sharing their stories with me about um, essentially the theme has become the feedback and how do you receive feedback. And we are all used to receiving feedback um, throughout our lives, but I think during medical training it takes on a new level of kind of importance and stakes. And so I thought it was important to have a conversation together about that. So if you have any questions that come up, you can feel free to put them in the chat. But otherwise, what I thought we would do is just I would spend some time coaching around uh, how do you take in feedback and move forward from it in a way that is useful and productive, because often we default to something that is um, maybe a little less useful. So I'll just say once again, as people are joining, if you have something to write with, I think that will be useful. One of the um, resources that I posted this week was a reflection called Between the Feedback and the Story, which I'm happy to work through as well. But I thought we would do something maybe just slightly different tonight, but those are available for you on the Substack page. So, with this in mind, and again, I have the chat open on the side. So, just if you want me to pause or if there's a question in particular you want me to help you work through, I'm happy to do that. Um, but otherwise, hi again, I'm Dr. Muldoon. And whether you're joining live or watching this later, I am really glad that you're here. And I feel very honored to share this space with you. So this week, I have been thinking a lot about feedback, not because feedback is new to me or to any of you. As I said a few minutes ago, we're all used to getting it throughout our lives, but because sometimes we go through periods where it seems to arrive all at once. And so, from my perspective, the stories that have been coming back to me this week are that, students are starting to open their board scores, the newly minted kind of third years moving into the rotation cycle. A lot of students are revising their personal statements and getting feedback from trusted sources or people that they're offering to show it to. Faculty right now are receiving course evaluations and reviews from spring quarter, or if you're on the semester system, from the 25-26 academic year. And almost every conversation I've had recently has had the same sentence in it somewhere. And it goes like this, and maybe this is familiar to you. I know I shouldn't take it personally, but I can't stop thinking about it. So maybe you have heard that also. So today I wanted to do some coaching around that. And it's something that I've come to call the feedback spiral. And that's because the feedback itself um, isn't actually what usually hurts us the most, especially if it's something we weren't expecting or feels out of alignment with what we feel was the effort we put in. But it's the story that we begin to write in our minds in the seconds after we receive it. So, what I would like for you to do is to think back to the last piece of feedback that really stayed with you. And it doesn't have to be like the most hurtful thing, just something that has stuck with you, that stayed with you for a little while. And maybe it was a board score, maybe an attending told you that you need to be more confident, or something about your delivery that they would like for you to improve. Maybe somebody edited your writing or gave you some feedback, a lot of red in the margins. Um, Maybe it's a patient interaction that didn't go the way that you hoped it would. Or, sometimes it's maybe just someone simply looked disappointed in you, or, had a interpersonal interaction that fell a little flat. So when you call that to mind, I don't want you to think about what happened next. I just want you to think about and try to remember um, the very first 5 seconds of your feeling after receiving that feedback, because that's usually where the spiral begins. Our brains are remarkable prediction machines. And the moment that something feels frightening or threatening, our minds will go to rush to explain it. It's part of the way in which our nervous system um, protects us. And because it is so fast, right? It's that fast kind of thinking. It's a lot of times not accurate. It's just quick. And those explanations may sound familiar to you, right? So this is the story, right? So you get, for example, a board score back that is disappointing. And the story that you create is that, oh, I'm not cut out for this, or everyone else has it figured out before me or better than me, or, you know, even if it's a good piece of feedback, sometimes the story we create is like, maybe I fooled everyone and I got past this one, right? As if you don't deserve it. Or maybe this proves what I've been afraid of all along, which is that I was never meant to be here. So notice what happened, right? The feedback is about one moment, one observation of something that happened. And then the story that we tend to create becomes about our identity and our worth. And those are not the same thing. So the reason why I think this is important is because a lot of the feedback that med students receive and trainees receive in their training uh, feels so high stakes that sometimes it's hard to pull us out of the story. And that's important to keep in mind, because when something is very important to us or we care deeply about it, the story can have a stronger grip than it might in other situations where we're able to let things go a little bit more easily. So I've been thinking about this because of the stories that I've been, the interactions that I've been having over the past week. But something actually happened to me recently that made me that reminded me of this, right? And I want to model this because it's a practice that you come back to, and you have to be mindful of practicing that muscle. Um, that's part of humanity and medicine, is that all of these reflections are reflective practices, right? When we're doing it within a community of practice. So what happened to me that reminded me of this is that for years I've taught a course that I love deeply. It's a course that I poured my heart into, and one that's been recognized with teaching awards. And so I know objectively, I um, that the course uh, is what I think it is. But then recently, in the past week, I had a conversation about it that was much harder to engage in than I expected. And for a few minutes, and maybe longer than a few, I caught my own mind. doing exactly what I coached people not to do. And it wasn't saying, you know, looking at the facts and thinking, well, some faculty didn't connect with this course, or some students, it didn't land with them this year. But what I found myself saying was, maybe I'm not good at this anymore. That's a very different sentence. So the feedback hadn't changed, but my story about it had, right? Despite all of the evidence in front of me. So the work wasn't convincing myself that the feedback I received didn't matter. It's not putting it off and disowning it and not engaging with it. The work is separating what was useful from that feedback from what my nervous system was inventing to protect me from my emotional reaction to it. So that is coaching, right? That's not positive thinking. That's not toxic positivity. That's not throwing the entire system of feedback out, right? Or it's not pretending that the criticism doesn't sting, right? It's learning to notice the story before you mistake it for the truth. So, here's an exercise that I use with clients, and this is where you can get your notebook out. I have mine here. Um, but something to keep in mind is you can write it down, and I'll be posting a little tiny practice one pager to go with it as well under the practice space on my Substack. But the next time you receive difficult feedback, maybe you can keep a book or have the practice where you write down 3 columns. So the first column is observation. And in that column, you write only facts, like only something that if somebody observed the interaction or the feedback that they would write down. So it's not opinions, right? So only facts. So for example, if it was about a test or a board score evaluation, the score was lower than I hoped, or just even the number, right? The attending said I interrupted the patient. My evaluator wanted more reflection. Okay, that is all, right? It's just the observable fact. So that's column 1 under observation. Column 2 is my interpretation. And this is where your brain starts filling in the blanks, right? And making that story. So if it's in regards to some feedback you got from an attending, they think I'm lazy. I'll never catch up, right? If you missed a test or got a score you weren't anticipating. Or here's one that I hear a lot. I'm disappointing everyone. Okay, so notice that there's a difference there. And then in the third column, I like to call this column the invitation, because I like to think of my life as a poem and think about what are my reactions inviting me to observe. So under invitation, the question is, what is this actually inviting me to learn? Right? Essentially, you're looking at the difference between the observation and the story. And somewhere in there, right, is something that's genuinely useful to reflect on that can help you consider what your next step is. So that's the invitation. So the question is, what is this actually inviting me to learn? Not how do I defend myself from this attack? Not how do I prove them wrong? But what is this inviting me to learn? And Sometimes the answer is a practical skill. Sometimes it's communication. Sometimes it's pacing. Sometimes the answer is that the feedback wasn't good feedback at all. Not every opinion deserves equal weight. But notice that the invitation there is for you to decide what the next step is and if the story that you're telling yourself about the facts has value. Because learning discernment, especially in medical training, is part of becoming a professional. You can't control the feedback that you're going to receive. You can only control your reaction to it. So that's a short exercise to help you work through when you find yourself caught in that feedback spiral. And that spiral is where you are in the story, right? And not in the facts. So this matters especially in medicine because medicine gives feedback constantly, right? You have um, the tests in the preclinical years, you have the board exams, and then you have shelf exams, and you have evaluations, and you have procedure accounts and um, patient comments, right? And then you have residency interviews and the whole that whole fourth year process towards the match, right? And it's easy to begin believing that you're simply the sum of those measurements. And I say this to my students a lot, and I hope you hear it, but you're not. You're not just a number. You're not the sum of those evaluations. Feedback is just information, and identity is something much deeper. And those are different conversations. So, if you have recently received feedback that wasn't what you hoped, take a breath before you decide what it means. A score tells you something about performance on one exam. A conversation lets you in on someone else's narrative. Doesn't mean that it's yours or that it negates your own experience. Neither of these things tell you whether you'll become a compassionate physician. It doesn't measure your persistence or your integrity. It doesn't measure how patients will someday feel when they leave your clinical space. So don't let one number or one conversation or one piece of feedback become your whole autobiography. And hopefully these exercises will help you move through that space a little bit faster. You get to decide what your reaction between the facts and the story that your mind is telling you um, is. That's you get to decide what your next step is and what is useful for you. So it's not throwing it out, right? It is looking at it, but looking at it with some space and a little bit of distance. So before we finish, I'd like to leave you with one question. And it's what's one piece of feedback that you've been carrying that may no longer deserve as much weight as you've been giving it? And that's not because it didn't matter, but maybe you've allowed it to become bigger than it actually was. So maybe starting tonight is a good night to start a practice to separate the feedback from the story. And resources to help you do that are on my Substack page. And I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts about them, what you find useful. Give me the feedback I promise that I'll separate it from the story I'll tell myself about it. I really appreciate you spending this time with me, and I'm always open to receiving the questions that you want to talk about in these conversations. I will be opening the chat again. It's open right now in this space, but also inside the Substack too, so we can keep the conversation going asynchronously. So if you'd like to continue the conversation, you can join me over on Substack, where I write each week about staying human in medicine. And if you're watching this after the live, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. So please continue to take good care of yourselves this week and reach out if there's anything that you need. I'm happy to be in this community with you. So see you next week.